Welcome everyone to another session of the MS Excel Toronto Meetup group. For those of you who are new here, who are attending a session for the first time, welcome. It's great to have you here. For those of you who have been with us other times, it's great to have you here too. And thank you for joining us and being with us. This is a place for us to connect with each other, to learn from each other. The group was started in 2019, and the purpose is to really give experts the opportunity to share what they have learned in Excel. And we have been having sessions roughly once a month. Initially in person, now only online. Not sure yet if we ever go back to in person, we will see. But for now, we are keeping online. And one of the big advantages of having sessions online is that we can have speakers from all over the world. So it allows us to learn from more people and bring experts from different areas. Whereas when we were meeting in person, we would have to have the speaker in person in Toronto, and now that does not need to happen. Also, all the members, anyone from anywhere in the world, can join the session from anywhere. And if the session, the time zone is not friendly for you, we usually post the sessions a couple of days after the session. We post the recording on YouTube, and we will send out an email to everyone who registered for the session, letting you know what the link is, sending you extra information that we may have from the speaker files and all that. So you can expect an email from us in a couple of days. Okay, so you should be looking at my screen. We are using Teams, so you know how it goes with comments and reactions, and so you can use the chat to ask questions, to make any comments. And Owen, later when he's presenting, he will decide the best moments to ask for questions. The session is being recorded, like I mentioned, so you must consent to be part of the recording if you keep connected. Otherwise, you can disconnect and catch up with the recording later. This is our YouTube channel. You can find us there, and you can subscribe if you want to keep on top of all the sessions and go through what we've been doing in the past. For the month of August, we will not have a session as we usually do. The month of August, we take a break, but then we already have sessions prepared for you from September through December, and even for the new year, some speakers lined up. But because we are still a little bit far away, I'm not going to say anything today. I will announce soon. Just keep an eye on the Meetup session. I see people today from all over the world, even from odd time zones. I see Sergey there, for example, and apologies for not saying hello to everyone, but welcome everyone to. And so Owen, yeah, I know that the topic is a hot topic and everyone is looking forward to learning from you. So I'll try to do the housekeeping short. So in this slide that I hope you can see, we have the sessions for July for several meetup groups around the world. If you want to take a picture, feel free to do so that you can check later with other meetup groups and pick and choose the topics of your preference. Faraz Shaikh publishes this on his LinkedIn profile every month, so feel free to connect with him there. And speaking of Faraz, he's also the organizer of My Data Summit 2022. It's happening in September, and Faraz is here with us. Faraz is organizing with Ilgar as well. So Faraz, I'll give you the stage so that you can speak about the event. You will do it better than I would do. So let us know what's going on there.
Yeah, so I'll just quickly share my screen.
Sure.
And if you can see, just let me know.
Yeah, we can see it.
Perfect.
Where was I sharing my screen before?
Yes, you were sharing
Okay,
your screen.
okay, just checking. Okay.
Okay, so welcome. This is for the My Data Summit, and in My Data Summit, it is happening on 5th and 6th, 5th, 6th, 7th September. It's a 3-day mega event where we have invited speakers from all over the globe, and it's going to be a lot of fun. 3-day event with Bill Jalen, Ken Pulse, Matt Ellington, Gashper. There are a lot of 33 massive names are here, and including we have Celia as well, who will be also presenting on this meetup. And we have a keynote speaker from Microsoft, the program managers, which are also going to come and present. So right now the ticket are like we are selling it for $89, and you can use the Celia code and you can get it for another 10% discount, and you can join the show. Here, these are some topics which I have, all these topics which are there. It's a massive list, so I couldn't able to put it in one slide. I did my best. I know these are very small, but you can always feel free to go and check on My Data Summit site agenda, where in detail you can get each and every speaker content and what they are going to present. So we have like financial modeling in Power BI. We have like Power Query greatest hits from Gashper. Then Oakley is going to present about where is all the data. And we have Celia also talking about some features in Excel skills where you can automate the reports and the procedure. We have Azure. So our concept is like we connect the Excel and try to connect the Excel technologies, what is connecting to the Microsoft Office. So keeping in mind that Excel is a core, and what are the other technology which is going to connect and which can really make our life easy.
Mhm.
So, and also we are having some master classes happening. We have some great master class happening, and make sure that you come and reserve yourself. I know from the chat, I can see from some lists that there are already some participants who have registered. But if you haven't, then I encourage you that you can please feel free to go and check that. So all this is happening over here on this virtual platform. This is a virtual platform which will be over there. So once you register, we will have you the access for the virtual platform where you can join, and it would be a wonderful place to explore. So all this, what you get? Why the 5 reasons I would encourage you that you get to see the top speakers, networking. You can come ask your questions always. We have 35 speakers, 9 masterclass, and what you will get is the access of the recording and certificate of attendance, and we also plan to donate something in the charity as well.
Any other time that you purchase, if you want to use Celia-10, I just posted it on the chat. It will give you 10% off the regular price of the event and the regular price of the master classes as well.
And just the last slide saying thank you to the sponsors, sponsors who are there, and our industry partner supports who are there. We have Excel Olympics, Excel Fire, Microsoft, and Listware, Plum Solutions, and Skillwave Academy, Goodly, some products, Solve and Excel, which is from Celia, our industry support partner. Thank you for supporting and coming us and making this thing possible. Our crazy idea, what we have, and coming and helping us out and making it possible.
Our pleasure, and it's a big task that you took on organizing this. I can only imagine all the work. So congratulations, and thank you for putting this together as well, because I'm sure it will benefit a lot of people.
Thank you. Thank you, Celia. That's all from my side, and I'll be looking forward to you, everyone, to see you at the event.
Thank you. Thank you. So there you go. If you want to take advantage, feel free to do so. I'm going to share my screen again just to continue and then give the word to Owen, because that's why we are all here today, to learn from him. So there's the code Celia-10, and shout out to Microsoft Reactor Toronto. It's another meetup group by Microsoft, and they have sessions about all technology, Microsoft technology related. Feel free to check them out on Meetup as well. And the Facebook group for Excel consultants, you can find them on Facebook or contact Catherine Mondragon to if you have any questions. And a big thank you to all of you. I got the third time the award of for MVP for the third time this year, and that award is related to the work we do to the community. A big chunk of the work that I do is associated with the this meetup group, MS Excel Toronto meetup group. So the award wouldn't happen if all of you were not coming here as you are coming today, and all the other times, and all the other presenters for all the work that they do. This award is due, and I need to thank you to all of you for that, because a big chunk of that award is related to this meetup group. Congratulations for being here, for being interested in upscaling your skills. That's all the point of this group. And congratulations also to all the other MVPs who got renewed this year. Some of them have been speakers here with us. And if you are interested in learning how to automate your Excel reports, take a screenshot of this slide. On those links, you can register to get to know when I'm launching a new class of my course. Registrations are closed at the moment, but there's some modules released for free. You can take advantage of those as well if you are interested. And that's it. That's enough for so many announcements. Here on the screen, we have how you can contact Owen Price if you are not connected with him yet on LinkedIn. And Owen calls himself a data guy, data person, and he will tell you better than I can do all the types of roles that he has been having over the years, learning about and dealing with data management in all types of different scenarios. I noticed Owen's content on LinkedIn, brilliant content, and it caught my attention, and I started to interact with him there. And at some point, I invited Owen to come and present to us, because I could see all the knowledge that he has about and excitement about the Lambda function in particular. Not only that, Owen posts about many different topics, but in particular about Lambda. And this function is quite new in Excel, and we had not have any presentation about this topic so far. So thank you, Owen, for accepting to present to us and making the time to prepare the materials and be here with us today. Thank you. The stage is yours. Let us know what are you up to these days, and let us know what is this thing of the Lambda function.
Okay, thank you. Can everybody, first of all, hear me okay? If you can hear me, say nothing. If you can't, you
yes,
want to answer this question?
We can hear you. Thank you, Owen.
And can you see my empty spreadsheet?
Yes, we can see a nothing spreadsheet.
A nothing spreadsheet, exactly. So just to talk about nothing for a few minutes, I am based in Texas, but I am actually from a town called Reading in the UK. I was raised there and I lived there for the first 30 years of my life. And then I moved to Houston, and it's very, very hot here. And I still haven't got used to it, even though I've been here for 12 years, 13 years, actually. I have been through many different roles, and they've all been involved with data. So I probably started with cash reconciliation in an insurance company in Reading. There's a big insurance company in Reading called Prudential. I worked there for a few years, and then I worked as a business systems analyst. And then I moved to another company where I was called an information systems executive, which is about as vague as you can get, but that role was pretty much do whatever needed to be done. So at that point, I learned how to use Access, and then I learned SQL Server, and then I started leading teams, and I was doing VBA development and developing scenario modeling tools for market research, so kind of pricing modeling tools. And then I started building integration services, workflows, and at one point I became more of a leader and less of a developer, and then I started helping other people to kind of realize what they wanted to do and kind of guide them towards the goals of the company. And I went through various different job titles over the years, and slowly but surely my team grew from being people in the UK to being people in the UK and Japan, and then it was people in the US, the UK and Japan, and then it was all the data engineers in the company. And eventually I was the CTO of the company and leading the IT team and the development team and the data engineering team. So that was up until 6 weeks ago, when I decided that I wanted to take a break. And so I'm actually on a career break at the moment, which is probably explains why I'm able to spend so much time creating these ridiculous Lambda functions. So I'm not working at the moment, which is great for me, and I'm very fortunate to be able to do that. But I have been through many, many different roles and worked with people from many, many countries. Our company that I just left have offices or people in probably 35 different countries around the world. So I was exposed to lots of different cultures and lots of different problems with data. So yeah, that's me, and I'm here to talk to you about Lambda. So I suppose I should get into it before I waste any more time. So the first sheet is how to draw an owl. Now, you may be familiar with this meme, but something that concerns me about teaching, or at least transferring knowledge, knowledge transfer, as we used to call it in the company, and I'm sure people call it in lots of different companies, is that finding the balance between complete beginner and someone who knows a lot about the subject is quite difficult. And so the transition from knowing completely nothing about Lambda to knowing a fair amount and being able to kind of manipulate it how you want it to be, and finding that middle ground is quite difficult. So I am going to do my best to find that middle ground, and I'm going to start slowly, but then ramp up to more complicated things as we go. And I've got a pen here, and I just want to draw your attention to this here at the bottom, which is probably the only important text on this screen. The rest of it is kind of there for curiosity, really. If you're really bored and you need to get to sleep, I suggest you go to that Wikipedia page that I've linked there. It is very, very dense, and to be totally honest with you, it's not very interesting. So maybe I'll just get rid of that. Can I? Yeah, just ignore that. So a Lambda function is a way to create a function without writing VBA. Now, this is an interesting idea to me, because while I can write VBA, I don't particularly enjoy it. I find that it's more trouble than generally it's worth. Many people are very, very good at it. I'm not one of them. And how to draw an owl actually refers to this meme. If you're familiar with this, draw some circles and then draw the rest of the owl. So it's typically to talk about how we start with the basics and then get super complicated really quickly, and there's no instructions in between. And so many online forums or articles or YouTube videos, they either assume that you know everything to begin with, or that you know absolutely nothing, and there's very little in between. And when I started my blog, it was because I was struggling to understand this Lambda concept, and I wanted to write it down in a way that I would understand it, and that's how I learned. I learned it by writing it down. So, oh, that's supposed to be at the back. I'm already badly prepared. So let's talk about the anatomy of a Lambda function. I'm not going to read all this out. You can read, I'm sure. So I'm just going to talk about the three portions of a Lambda function, and that is the parameters, which I've labeled in green here. There's the calculation, and then there are the arguments. What I want to draw your attention to is this. You can create a lambda function just by typing it in a cell. The square brackets around the parameter names means that they are optional. You don't need parameters. You can have a lambda without parameters. You must have a calculation, and you must have the parentheses for the arguments. But if you don't have any parameters, then you won't need any arguments. But you still must have the parentheses. And in this presentation, I'm going to show you various different ways of defining some interesting lambdas and how they can solve simple problems and complicated problems, but as well as defining them, how to save them so that we can transfer and really simplify what will eventually be a very, very long formula, which will look something like that, but this calculation part will be incredibly complex. We will save that as a name, and we'll either do that in the name manager, or we will do it in the advanced formula environment, which is a fairly new add-in, which I only started using about a month ago. But I'm getting used to it. So so without further ado, let's move on and start with some simple lambdas. I'm just going to slide my touchscreen out of the way so that I don't accidentally close it with my arm, which is what I've done several times while practicing this. So some simple lambda functions to get started. So you may be familiar with the today function. This is another example of, there are no arguments. There are no arguments for this function because it always performs the same calculation, but you still need the parentheses. So that's today, and then tomorrow is today plus 1. We all know that. That's fairly simple. Hang on, I've closed the formula bar and I didn't mean to. Okay. So to create a lambda function, the very first simple way we can do it is type it into a cell. We can type lambda, and then we'll skip the parameters, and we'll just put a calculation, which is today plus 1. Now, if I do that like that, it won't work, and you will find at some point, if you're developing lambda functions, that you will do this as well. But you do have to remember, if you have no parameters, then you need no arguments, but you must have the parentheses. You must have the parentheses. So let's try that again. Plus 1, and then you must have open and close at the end. So that works now. That is a lambda function in a cell, and in that form, where it doesn't have a name, that is more true to the kind of programmer's understanding of a lambda function. If you program in Python or other languages, you use a lambda as an anonymous function, and so typing it in a cell like this without a name, it's an anonymous function, but it's doing something for you, and it's a quick and dirty way to solve your problem. So what I did earlier is create this tomorrow function, and the tomorrow function is defined in the name manager. Oh, did not reset this to what it should have been. Like that. Okay, so I've created a name in the name manager, and the name of the function is tomorrow. I've put a comment in there to tell me what it does, and then I have typed the lambda expression into the refers to box. And that lets me, what have I done wrong? I've got 2 things. And that lets me use that here. So I've got the open and closed parentheses, even though there are no parameters. So it all makes sense so far, hopefully. So, but if we want to get things a bit more complicated, and really not very complicated, this is the simplest part of the presentation, we can just do today plus that. And we know we're all familiar with working with cell references, but actually in this calculation, B9 is a reference to an argument. And so B9, the content of B9 is a parameter. So we can refer to this as a parameter as days after today. We just give it a name in the Lambda function, and then we'll put today plus days after today. And that is going to be the Lambda function, which calculates 3 days or 4 days or 5 days after today. And earlier I also created this today offset, which is I have named that Lambda function in the same way that I did with the tomorrow function, and I pass it an argument for the days after today parameter, and it returns that like that. Now what I accidentally showed you earlier was that because tomorrow is actually a special case of today offset, what we can do is instead of having today after today plus 1 in here, we can use the today offset function with a constant argument, which represents tomorrow. So that way, if I ever want to change the definition of what an days after today is, I will change it in one place, and tomorrow will follow that logic. So I'll change the today offset function, and tomorrow will be changed automatically. Okay, so this is the simple stuff, and I'm gonna speed up a bit now because I'm realizing I'm talking too slowly. So the thing about Lambda is it's all well and good to create Lambda functions, but actually the real power behind all of it is the let function, and really the presentation should be about the let function, because that's what really makes it important and what really makes it powerful. So I've started here with a very simple let expression, which defines 1 as A3 and so on until 4 as A6. And then I've got a very simple calculation at the end of the let function, and it gives me 10. Okay. Now, you're probably all aware that you can create calculations rather than just create named calculations. So I've got 1 plus 2, and I've used the names 1 and 2 in these calculations here, 3 and 4, and then 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 is the same result. So to take that a step further, and this is a stupid example, but the point here is to illustrate that as well as being able to save these lambdas in the name manager, we can define them within the let function. So you can see, let me just make sure that this is going to work this time. You can see here, that I've created a lambda which takes 2 parameters, A and B, and then the calculation is A plus B, and it's called plus. So I've actually defined a lambda called plus here. And then in this calculation, I've used that lambda function to add 1 and 2 together, and I've used it here to add 3 and 4 together, and finally I've used it here to add 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 together. So the purpose of this sheet is to really just show you in a very simple fashion that we can define lambdas within the let function. They don't have to be saved, each of them, in the name manager. Sometimes it's not appropriate, sometimes that would be completely unnecessary. You don't want to overcomplicate your workbook with a load of junk. So here's the function again. And just to show you, I've nested this 3 times because there are 3 operators in the calculation. And so each time I nest it, I'm embedding that plus operator. So I'm adding 3 and 4 together, and I'm adding the result of that to 2, and then the result of that to 1 to give me the result 10. Okay, I'm going to move on. Has anybody got any questions?
Not so far. Only a comment about your presentation skills and the way you set up your. I'm also just admiring and having fun here and trying to figure out how you do that. You'll teach me that later on another.
Yeah, it's conditional formatting. I'm just typing a Y at the top of these columns.
Yeah, I thought he must be typing some space or something there. That's what I thought.
Yeah. So. Okay. I actually didn't know how to use this drawing feature last week. I just figured it out. So if it goes wrong, that's why. Okay, so I posted this Lambda last week where I was thinking about, oh, okay, let me think of a text manipulation example. And I thought, well, what if I end up with some data which has missing spaces, but it's, you know, fortunately for this problem, in proper case. So the reason I say fortunately for this problem is that if it weren't in proper case, this problem would be very difficult to solve indeed, but it is in proper case, which is, you know, very fortunate for my presentation. And so that's why I designed it that way. So the goal here is to take this text, MSXL Toronto Meetup group, and find where the spaces should go and insert the spaces. This is going to get quite involved, so bear with me. And at the end of each kind of section, I will ask for any questions. So what I start with is, I never actually start with Lambda, by the way. I always start with let.
Owen, sorry to interrupt you before you, because you are going to start, and another question just came in, and it may be important to answer these now. Harry is asking the difference between parameters and arguments. Thoughts?
Yeah,
I
forgot to show you my meme for that, didn't I? Yeah. So I created all this stuff, and then, you know, I realized I had to look that up myself, because while I had a vague idea of it, even though I've been doing programming for many years, it never really stuck in my mind. But actually, a parameter is a placeholder in a function definition, which receives data and then is used as a variable name in the calculation. An argument is a value that is provided to a parameter. Okay, so whenever you've used an Excel function which takes, you know, you select B1 and you select C1 and it compares if they're the same, that kind of thing. The data that you've got in those two cells, those are the arguments. The requirement or the placeholders in the function where you select those cells, those are the parameters. And my meme that I had here is that, you know, it actually doesn't matter if you get it confused, as long as you, the person you're talking to about it knows what you're talking about. It doesn't matter, yeah? But that is the difference. The difference is the arguments are the values and parameters are the placeholders.
And there's also variables. And I had a discussion the other day on a training about M language. And the conclusion was, for me, was pretty much that nobody cares, because in the end, it seems that the word variable and parameter, for example, may be used slightly different when you move from one language, programming language, to another one. And in my head, they are what I learned when I was getting my training in mathematics. And there was some kind of incompatibility there. So in the end, as long as you understand where each thing needs to go, and that's it.
So you may find that in this presentation, I'm using parameter and argument interchangeably by accident. If anything I say is confusing, please just stop me and I will clarify.
Thank you.
Okay, so like I was saying, I don't start with lambda, I start with let. That creaking door sounded like the beginning of a horror movie. So,
it's a sign.
So I'm trying not to use the beta functions in this presentation. So here, what I'm doing is I'm using mid of the data in cell A1, and then I'm using a sequence of the length of the data in cell A1, and I'm using one character at a time. And the net result of that, which is not super interesting, is that I get an array of characters. Okay. I could use, there's a text split function that I could use for that, but I'm not going to use those functions in this presentation. So I've got an array of characters. The reason I wanted to start with that is that I need to figure out where the spaces go. And so I want to be able to test some conditions against each position in this string. Okay, and so the next thing I wanted to do was, well, I looked at this string and I thought, okay, it's very fortunate for me that it's proper cased, because I know then for proper case, I should generally try to find the space will be before the capital letter in each case. Generally, I mean, it won't always be that. So I created a calculation here, which let me just highlight that. Just this calculation, after trying it without the exact function and after realizing that the equals operator is not case sensitive, I realized that in order to test whether each character was uppercase, I needed to use this calculation. So now you can see that for the first 3 letters, it returns true. And for the lowercase letters, it returns false. And for a T, the capital T, it returns true, and so on. Okay, so we're getting somewhere. I've identified the capital letters. Okay, and at this point, I've given myself a reminder to introduce you to this scan, reduce, and map functions. So this was probably the most opaque set of functions. When I started learning Lambda, I avoided these for a long time because I just didn't understand them and I didn't understand the documentation. It used language that I just couldn't connect with. But I finally, banged my head against the desk long enough to understand it and tried to put it in my own words. So for scan iterates through an array. And what it does is it applies a function after each iteration where it uses both the result from the previous iteration and the value on the current row of the array. So in this case, I've defined A as being the result, the starting value, B as being the current row, and then the calculation is just A plus B, so it's that plus that. Okay? Now what scan does is it does exactly what these 10 formulas have done. So it's 0 plus 1 is 1, 1 plus 2 is 3, 3 plus 3 is 6, and so on, all the way down to 45 plus 10 is 55. So in the most basic of understanding, that is what scan does. And just to show you how we define it, we use scan and we define an initial value. If you leave that initial value out, I believe it defaults to 0, but someone with more knowledge can correct me on that point. And then we define the array as the second parameter, and then we define a lambda function. And in the documentation, it uses A and B, so that's what I use as well. And in the point is that in this lambda function, the first parameter refers to the result of the previous iteration, which is also referred to as the accumulator. And the second parameter, which is B in my example, refers to the value on the current row of the array being scanned. So this actually produces the same result in a single formula as these 10. That's what scan does, okay? Reduce, I'm copying and pasting here. I should have locked these first though. Reduce works, I mean, it works identically to scan, except it only returns the final value. Okay, so reduce works the same way as scan, but it only returns the final value. In this case, it's 55. So it's iterated through this. It's applied a calculation during each stage, and then it's given us the final value. And then map. Map works similarly, but not identically. Map applies a function to each row in an array, but it does not let you use the value from the previous row, or the calculation on the previous row. So just to show you as an example, the array is here, and then generally you have a 1 parameter lambda function as the second parameter of map, and generally I use x. Your preference may vary, and in this example, if I do sum of sequence x, what that will do is for each row in that sequence of 1 to 10, it will calculate that sequence. For the first row, it will be a sequence of 1 row. For the second row, it will be a sequence of 2 rows, and it will sum those numbers. Yeah, so it produces the same results. But the point is that scan allows you to work with the previous value, reduce returns the last value of a scan, and map simply applies a function to each element of an array. Now, if that seems a bit opaque, don't worry too much about it. It will become clear with practice. So, the reason I wanted to introduce that is because I need to speed up now because it's 5:14. Is because I've got a scan in this version here, and as in a very basic iteration for this problem, I'm going to scan through each letter in the array. And in this example, I've just concatenated them with the ampersand operator, and you can see that as we go down each row, it builds the full string because I've got a very simple function here, which is just A ampersand B. Now, if I make it a bit more complicated by putting a space between every letter, then wow, okay, that's not the right answer, but at least now I understand what it's doing. I can see what it's doing, yeah? So in order to get a bit more nuanced, I have defined what I want to do is I want to test each character as I scan through it. I want to test if it's an uppercase letter. So I've taken the calculation here and I've converted it into a isUpper function, which is a lambda function with a single parameter with the same calculation. And then during the scan, I'm scanning the array of characters, and I've got my lambda function with the A and B as explained before, and I'm adding, I'm concatenating with the previous result. I'm concatenating a space if the current letter is an uppercase letter, otherwise I'm concatenating nothing, and then the current letter. So the result of that is that it's putting a space before every capital letter. I've trimmed it at the end so there isn't one at the beginning, and that's kind of a nice result, but I don't really like the fact that there's a space between MS, so we can do it a bit better. And of course, well, I mean, excuse me, something wrong with my scroll bar. So you can see, I just wanted to show you that I've changed scan to reduce just so that I get a single result, yeah? Because all of this, showing all of this stuff, that's not really interesting. That's just for development purposes, but the end result is really what I want. So reduce is the function that I want to use. So anyway, I think we can improve on that. Let's try this. Okay, so to improve on that, I want to check if the previous letter is a capital letter. And if it is, then I don't want to insert a space. So what I've done here is I've got the same isUpper lambda, and I'm still scanning the characters, and I've still defined a lambda with A and B, but this time I'm concatenating the A with if the current letter is an uppercase letter, and the previous letter, which is defined by this expression, is not an uppercase letter. And we know that this is the previous letter because as we scan through each of the letters, the last character of A is always the letter from the previous iteration. So if I take write A1, test it with isUpper, and then use not to say if the current letter is a capital and the previous letter is not a capital, then put a space, otherwise don't put a space, and then add the next letter. Now, that's kind of, now I've put it out, I put it in this detail because I want you to kind of see that these things rarely go smoothly. What I tried to do was correct the space between M and S, but I didn't want to remove the space between S and E, but I have, which is not what I wanted. So I'm kind of going in the right direction, but perhaps not in a straight line. So Next, I'm going to explain to you something which I like doing. I think it's a really useful technique. I'm going to refer to it as an index scan. There are experts on this call who can probably correct me and say I don't need to do this, but this is what I've done. So first, I've created an index, which is the sequence of numbers from 1 through the length of the string. I've changed my character array to use the index instead of the sequence. And now instead of scanning the characters, I'm scanning the index, okay? So B is always a number from the index. So in order to get at the characters, I need to use the index function to retrieve the current character for index characters row B. And then the reason I'm using an index scan is because it allows me to look forward in the array, whereas scan does not. So in this case, I'm using B plus 1 to get the next letter. And so I've defined that as next is equal to if error index characters B plus 1. And so instead of looking, okay, is the previous letter a capital? I'm going to say if the current letter is a capital and the next letter is not a capital, then I'm going to insert a space before the capital. Okay, so that's why I'm doing this index scan instead of using scanning the character array itself. So here I've got is upper current and not is upper next. Put a space, otherwise don't. And this actually produces quite a nice result for this string. And finally, if I use the reduce function, you can see that it's done exactly what I wanted it to. Moving on.
Brilliant.
I thought, well, okay, I could stop there, but that's actually a really simple example. MSXL Toronto Meetup group, it doesn't have any punctuation in it. And actually, this is the tricky part, is finding where to put spaces where there are quotes in your text. So I've added some arbitrary text to the end of the example. And this is as a reminder, the character array. This is the previous sheet's scan. Now, unchanged, it's done what I told it to do, which is it's put the space before the capital that has a next letter uncapitalized. But of course, with quotes, that's not right. So actually, what I want to do is make sure that every time I encounter an opening quote, and just to be absolutely crystal clear, that is an opening quote and that is not an opening quote, that's a closing quote. Every time I encounter an opening quote, I want to insert a space. And I don't want to insert a space before a closing quote. So there's actually two problems here, which I'll get to in just a moment. So I want to identify if a character is a quote. Now, it just so happens that the quote character, the double quote character, is code 34. So I've created this isQuote function so that when I'm scanning, I can test if the current character is a quote or not. And just to show you what it does, I've used the map function as the output here to map the isQuote function to the characters array so that it will show you that here is a quote on line 30, on row 30, and this is also a quote on row 38, and it's got a true there and false everywhere else. So that's really just to demonstrate that it is working. And just as a little reminder, this is the character index from 1 through 34. That's how many characters there are in the string. And here, this is, so this is where things get a bit complex. So what I needed to do is I needed to identify the difference between an opening quote and a closing quote. So that's, maybe there are better ways to do this, but this is the way I came up with. I, first of all, created this quote positions array. It's a filter. Yeah, so it's filtering the index, which is the character position. It's filtering the index using that true false array, which maps the is quote lambda to the characters array. And if you know how filter works, hopefully you do, the first array is what you want to filter, and the second array is the map or the include parameter, which is true, false, or 0, 1. And so what that does is it returns these numbers 26 and 34, which means that the 26th character in the string is a quote, and so is the 34th character. Now what I want to do is then further filter that to identify which of those character positions represent opening quotes and discard everything else. Now what I know is that, well, quotes come in pairs, and you start with a quote and then you have another quote to close the whatever your quotation is. So if I had 3 different quotations, I would have 6 rows in this array, and I would have open on row 1, 2, and then 3 would be open, 4 would be close, 5 would be open, and 6 would be closed. So what's common about these 3 numbers? Well, they're all odd. Yeah. So they're all odd numbers. So all I really need to do is filter. I don't know why I can't scroll properly. What I need to do is filter the result of this quote positions. In fact, I'm going to filter this, which is this choose 1, 2 Q count quote positions. I'm going to filter it for the odd rows. And I'm doing that here. Opening quote positions. I'm filtering the quote positions by the odd sequence of quotes. So that just gives me the first quote. I've created this kind of helper function here called list.contains, which is just a very simple, does this value exist in this list? Does this value exist in this list? And it uses xmatch, is error, and not to return true or false. And then I've used that list contains function here to say, does an integer that I pass into the function exist in the list of opening quote positions? And the reason I've done it that way will hopefully become clear when we look down here. So what I'm doing here is I'm building criteria for when I will insert a space. And we previously had and upper letter not is upper letter next, but now we want to also insert a space if it's an opening quote. So the is opening quote function, we insert the position that we're at, which is the number B from the index, as the int parameter of the is opening quote function, and it checks if that integer exists in the opening quote positions list. And if it does, the function returns true. So this criteria then is saying if either the criteria we had before or it's an opening quote, if either of those things are true, then insert the space, otherwise don't insert the space. And the net result is that I've now got a space before the opening quote, but I've still got a problem here because I've got spaces after the opening quote and a space before the closing quote. Now the reason for that is, I'm running out of time, aren't I? The reason for that is completely forgotten what the reason for that is. Oh, that's right. Yeah. The reason for that is that I don't want to have a space in the original criteria. The original criteria, remember, is it's a capital letter. The next letter is not a capital letter. However, if the letter before the character before the capital letter is an opening quote, I don't want to insert the space. If it's not an opening quote, I do. And the result of that is that I now don't have a space here. But I do still have a space at the end. I'm trying to speed up. The reason for all of this nonsense is that the is upper function, in my ignorance, thinks that a quote character is a capital letter. And so it's putting a space before it, because that's what I told it to do. So I actually need a better function than that. And I changed it. I created a second lambda called isLetter. And isLetter checks if the code of the uppercase version of the character is between 65 and 90. And if you're familiar with the code table, then there's no hope for you. But if you are familiar with that, you'll know that that is A through Z. And then the isUpperLetter, new isUpperLetter function, instead of just checking if this is true, it also checks if it is an actual letter. So down here, I'm now using isUpperLetter there and there. And the result of that is it removes the space from before that, because it now no longer thinks that's an uppercase letter. And then I just use reduce, and it's given me the right answer. Okay, got about 15 minutes left, I think, maybe 10. I'm going to keep going, and then I'm going to ask people for questions. I know it's a lot to take in, and I'm moving very, very quickly, and it feels like I'm drawing the owl too fast.
We still have 30 minutes in total, so that's fine.
Okay, fine. I'll slow down.
There's some comments. Tom, I think Mike Thomas or Tom, someone was asking at some point if what you were using was a recursive lambda, an example of it.
This example is not a recursive lambda, but I do have a recursive lambda later in the presentation.
Okay, and someone was asking how can we share lambdas with other users?
I will also show you that.
Okay, so
yeah,
we're good. Thank you.
Yeah,
I think that's pretty much it. If I forgot something, you know, on the chat. Sorry. There's one challenge for you. Don't have to solve it now. Maybe your last function solves it. Bob Amlas was proposing a challenge with what about IBM is a company where
IBM I know, and I'm going to talk about that in just a moment.
Okay. So
yeah, I knew there'd be someone who would say something like that. It didn't escape my attention, and I've solved part of it, but not all of it.
Okay.
So the next example is it's the same function, add spaces, I'm calling it. She dropped the dollar and I picked it up. Now, if we use the same function as we have before, you will see that, oh dear, this is not very good. The A is connected there and the I is connected there, which is not what we want. So fortunately, the way the whole thing fits together is that I've got an OR function for my condition of when to put a space or when not to put a space. And I can just add as many conditions into that OR function as I want. And I have added, in fact, one here, which says if the current letter is an uppercase letter and it's either an A or an I, and the previous letter is not an uppercase letter, and this is the part which is perhaps not as good as it could be, then insert a space, otherwise don't. And so the end result of that is that the space then gets correctly inserted here and here. And then reduce, of course, sorry, scan, you literally just change scan to reduce, just copy it and change that one word, and it will just return the single text. And now comes the part about your question, which is, the problem is when it ends with a 3-letter acronym, it all falls apart. You can see that this is no good, right? In fact, it's so no good that I'm going to do one of these right here. And at this point, we could continue ad infinitum, adding and tweaking conditions, yeah. But you have to know when to stop, because natural language processing is actually not that easy when you get into the real complexities of it. And you have to ask yourself, is it appropriate for me to spend this amount of time trying to solve for this kind of edge case? Now, if you know your data and you know your data frequently has acronyms in it, then you would solve it. But in this example, I did not solve it. Maybe I will in the future, but I didn't right now. But it's definitely an issue. And I'm sure there are other issues and other examples which I haven't thought of. But I guess the message I would say here is you go through this process of iteratively making your Lambda more robust and more complex, and you get it to a point where it does most of what you want it to do. And then you ask yourself, well, do I want to continue or do I want to stop? And you can do either because it's your work, right? So I chose to stop at this point because I wanted to do something else.
Is there, Owen, one question, is there a limit on the number of characters that you can enter on a single cell to keep building on these functions?
There is a limit to the number of characters in a cell, but it's huge. You'll never reach it.
Okay.
But there is a limit to the length of characters that you can paste into the name manager. Eric would say that there is no such limit. I think we've got different computers or something, because if I try to paste something with more than about 2,000 characters, it doesn't work. I might just be being stupid, but they can get quite complex. What I did learn yesterday was there's a maximum height for these cells of 409.5, yes. Which is why you can see that I started putting them on the same line. Okay, so that's that. I want to skip on to the next, and I won't just recap some of the important things that we've just talked about, or I've just talked about, and I apologize for that. It's rarely a straight line between your problem and your solution, but that's okay. Just go in the right direction, and if you're on the wrong path, revisit what you've done and modify it. You won't think of everything up front. Don't try to, don't worry about it. It's not that important. More practically, we can name Lambda functions in the name manager or in the let function. So they don't need to be saved in the name manager. And just to recap, scan, reduce, and map. Though you remember what I told you about that, but I will of course share the spreadsheet with you, the workbook with you, and you can see everything in your own time. I have found that an index scan of a sequence of the length of the array is a good option, because it allows us to look forward in the array as well as back in the array, as well as the current value of the array. So an index scan is sometimes a useful option. And that would also let you scan, really theoretically scan through several similarly sized arrays at the same time, which I've also done a few times. And then know when to stop. Don't spend many hours on edge cases that are rarely encountered and quickly corrected. And just, be gentle with yourself. There'll be better ways of doing what you've done, and don't beat yourself up about it. I do that sometimes. I don't recommend it. So that's the first example. The other two are shorter. You'll be pleased to hear, but perhaps they might be more interesting. So this is a Lambda that I posted on LinkedIn a couple of weeks ago, and it was inspired by a video that I saw from Dearmouth early, and he's a financial modeling expert and is just incredible how quickly he works with it. But I wanted to create a list of payment dates for a mortgage or a loan or something like that, and I wanted to simplify the process of creating those dates. And you know that you can create a list of dates using the date function by giving it a year, and then if in the month parameter, if you put a sequence in there, you can have essentially a list of month numbers, and then if you put all of that inside the date function, it will give you a list of dates. So that's exactly what I've done here. I've got a start date of December of 2021, the last day of December. I've got a 2-year term with payments every 3 months. And so what I've got here is 2 year every 3 months. So that's 8 payments. Okay. So that's simple. There is method to this madness, by the way. The next thing I wanted to do was introduce this, what I call an endpoint offset. Now in Diarmuth's videos, he recommends having your list of dates begin before the beginning of the term. So add a couple at the beginning and a couple at the end, so that if you need additional calculations before and after the actual loan calculations, you have space to work with. So I use this endpoint offset to increase the number of rows passed into the month part of the date function by doing this. I just add endpoint offset times 2 in there. Now, it didn't do exactly what I wanted to begin with. What it's actually done here is just added 4 rows to the end, but the start date is still on the 31st of December of 21, and actually I want it to be 2 periods before that. And the reason for that is because I did not correctly calculate the start date in this month function or in this year function. So here I use the EO month function to calculate the offset start date and pass that into the year function and that into the month function. And then that now adds 2 months to the beginning and 2 months to the end. And we've got the 8 payment dates in between. This isn't just to talk about this lambda. There is actually a point to all this. What I wanted to really talk about was error checking and catching errors. So what if you have a bad value? What if someone puts some text in there, right? The function is actually not going to work if you put text in there. However, you can create fairly simple error trapping by defining names in your let function. So I have just changed what have I changed? The period months to something. I typed the word text in there, but I can't see it. So I've got this calculation here. I said if the period months parameter is not a number, then use the default 3. Otherwise, round the period months to 0 decimal places. Because if someone puts a decimal in there, 3.1, 3.4, I'm not interested in that. I want it to be rounded. I want it to be an integer. And if someone puts text in their invalid value, then I want it to be 3 as a default. And similarly, for the term years, I've done the same thing, except the default value will be the NA error, and it will round the term years if it is a number. And similarly, for the start date, it will return NA for that check, or round it if it is a number. So what I'm getting to here is that if you are developing something like this and you see a calculation that is shared, and these are quite similar calculations, that is a candidate for you to create an embedded Lambda function. Let me get rid of that. And so I've created this RND, which is short for round, and it takes 2 parameters, a value and a then, and it says it checks the value to see if it's not a number, and if it's not a number, it returns then. Otherwise, it rounds the value to 0 decimal places. That way, I can apply this logic here to the start date, here to the term years, in both cases returning this error, and here to the period months, in which case I'm returning the 3 as the default. And then the rest of the function is the same. There's just a few more steps. So here I have converted this into a lambda in the cell. There's nothing too special about that. I've got the arguments at the bottom for each of the parameters. And here I wanted to show you about optional parameters. If you see square brackets, that's an optional parameter, which means you don't need to provide it, but you can if you want. When we have an optional parameter, we use the isOmitted function to check if it was omitted or not. And if it was omitted, we provide a default value. So in this case, if someone calls this function and doesn't provide an endpoint offset, it will assume that we should use the value 1. But if they do provide the endpoint offset, it will use the RND function to check if the endpoint offset that was provided is a number. And if it's not a number, it will use 1. And if it is a number, it will round it to 0 decimal places. And then it will wend its merry way to the solution. I'm going a bit crazy with the pen here, sorry. Just going all the way back to the beginning of the presentation, the title of this presentation is Simplify, Save and Succeed. So all of this nonsense here, this is just garbage, right? We don't want to put that into a cell. We want to put this into a cell. This is the simplify part. So we give it a name, and then we can just call it whenever we want. We can embed it in other functions, and it will give us a nice list of dates exactly as we want. So, things to remember about this. If you find yourself repeating the same or similar calculation several times inside a function, that is a candidate for an embedded lambda. So think about it. Look at your function. Can you simplify it further by embedding the logic in a lambda function and applying that logic throughout? It will simplify the development process as well as your experience. Optional parameters are enclosed in square brackets. And finally, we use the isOmitted function to check if an argument was passed to an optional parameter, and if it was omitted, provide a default value. So there's the general format. If is omitted, a default value, otherwise the value. Okay, so do we have any more time?
Yeah, go ahead, 15 minutes at least.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Good. So I'm going to go all the way back. When I was learning about lambdas, I wanted to do really, really complex stuff. And this is when I ran into those limits on name sizes. So I've got some data from Wikipedia here. I've got the population from one page in Wikipedia, and I've got the genetically modified food area from another page, and I've merged them in Power Query. I've created this, what do I call it? Crop pop query. By the way, the company I used to work for is involved in agricultural market research, which is why many of my examples involve crops. So what I would like to be able to do is create a summary of this, but without using a pivot table. And I'd like to have more complex aggregates than the simple kind of sum, average, and so on. So I'd like to be able to group by these two columns, and I would like to return a comma-separated string of the foods in each country region, the sum of the area, and the average of the population. Now, I'm not going to go into detail of this group aggregate function because it's kind of complex, but the reason I'm showing it to you is because I want to talk about recursive filter. So group aggregate works like this. You create a control array where you give instructions to the function of what to do with the data in that column. In this case, I want to group by the first these two columns. I want to do a text join on this column. I want to sum this column, and I want to take the average of these because they're the same for each country. Okay, and that works like this. This is the data. This is the control. And it creates this summary table. Okay, so if you wanted to do this, and we're putting aside Power Query, we're putting aside pivot tables, but if you wanted to do this with formulas, generally you would need to create unique on these, and then for each row you would need to do a text join or a sum if or an average if. And that could get progressively more complex if you've got lots of grouping fields, or if you want to do aggregates that are not supported by any of the standard functions. So the good thing about lambdas is you can create your own aggregates. In this example, I've created, I'm using the text join function as an aggregate on text. Okay, but the way this works is that it steps through each of these rows. It filters the data from this table over here based on this region and this country, and it then iterates through text join, sum, average, applying them successively to each of the rows that are returned by the filter. Now, what I needed for that is a way to simply define a filter on the data without having to list separate conditions in a sum if or an average if or whatever it might be. And building a filter criteria and include parameter involves enclosing each condition in parentheses and then either separating them by multiplication operator or by plus operator for or. So what I wanted to do is actually create a way of just making that much easier. So what I've done here is I've said I want to filter this data, and just today I changed it so that I can use the names. I'm going to filter that data by region and country for Americas and Argentina. What that does is it will essentially applies a filter the data by Americas, and then it passes that data, the result of that filter, back into the recursive filter function, and then filters it by country to return just the Argentina data. And it's it will support as many filter fields as you want. You just need to define them with those two arrays, the column names and the values that you want to filter by. So the reason that was useful for this function is that it then allowed me to just calculate the cotton, maize, soybean text string by just doing the text join on this column, do a sum on this column, and then do an average on this column, and then move down to Asia, China, then Asia, India, and so on and so forth. So talking about recursive functions, this is how it works. I start by making sure that the number of columns in the cols, which is the column headers, is the same as the number of criteria. If it's not, the function will return this error. If they are the same, then first of all, I want to check, because this cols parameter supports positional indexes as well. I want to check, does the cols array contain any text? And if it does contain any text, then the assumption of the function is that the cols parameter contains column names. It then moves on to say if that parameter contains column names, then use this xmatch to retrieve the column positions. So you compare the cols parameter with the column headers, which are assumed to be one row above the data, and return the positions as the column positions. And then for each iteration, it grabs the first column position. So in this case, it's the position of the region column. It grabs the criteria for that position, which is Americas, and then it runs the filter. Oops, I just crossed that out. Then it runs the filter, very simple filter. It filters the data coming into the function by region equals America. And then this is the part where it recurses. It checks if the column positions array that was calculated here, if it has more than one column, then we've still got work to do. We need to go back into the recursive filter function. But this time, instead of providing the full data, we're going to provide the result of the previous filter, which was calculated here. And we are going to drop one of the items off of the original column positions array and pass that as the new cols, and drop one of the criteria from the original criteria array and pass the result as the new criteria. This would be much simpler if I just used the drop function, but I don't like making things simple. So if we've got more than one column left, call the function again, keep doing that, until we've only got one column left, in which case the assumption is this filter is actually the result that we want. And if column's col position equals 1, we'll return filter to the output, and the output will come back to the spreadsheet. That's the end of my presentation. I've just got lists to show you at the end. Oh, and just one comment that I saw that there were some people on the call who I have a great deal of respect for, particularly Sergey, and I think if I saw Peter in there earlier, but maybe not, and Eric and several other people. Thank you for joining, and thank you for listening. Does anybody have any questions?
Feel free to unmute if you want to ask instead of typing in the chat. Owen, this is brilliant. Most of us will still need to understand the basics. Where can I type a lambda? How can I type? What do I need to type a lambda to type in to have a lambda? When to have the parentheses or not? How to call a lambda and enter the argument values and all that. But like you said, we need to practice. That's the only way. It's not a simple task.
Yeah, so just to that
into
point, I apologize if it was too much too fast. I wanted to find a balance. Maybe I did, maybe I didn't. But we can chat about it if you want.
There's nice comments there. Amazing, incredible presentation. Great presentation. Mike Thomas is mentioning his YouTube channel with a video about Lambda. Thank you for your presentation from Sergey and all of us, in fact. Yeah, I enjoyed starting with the way you presented, how you made the Excel sheet, the Excel spreadsheet to work as a presentation canvas was brilliant. And the potential of the Lambda function. And because I like programming, maybe not at the level you are doing it, but because I enjoy programming, I was just delighted to see the progression of your reasoning, and very happy when I could keep up with it, which not always happened, but I did understand the broad case. So
I mean, I can I just make a comment about like Lambda and functional programming. If you've used used the if function or the VLOOKUP function, you've done some functional programming. Lambda is just a way to define calculations anonymously, and you just happen to be able to save them in the name manager. It's really not that much different. It's just that you can do a lot more with the let function than you could before. So I would start simple and build up to something that will really solve a tricky problem for you.
How do you compare using Lambda against user defined functions with VBA? What is
So first of all, with a Lambda, you don't need to save the file as XLSM. So it's easier to share. It doesn't have security risks. There's a lot that can go wrong with user-defined functions. They're much more powerful, but there are many, many things that can go wrong with them. I am not a person who enjoys writing user-defined functions mainly for that reason. But I forgot to show you that there's this advanced formula environment add-in. If you Google it, you'll be able to find it and install it. And by using this, you can actually, if you want, you can develop your Lambda functions in here. I generally don't do that just because I got into a bad habit of doing it in Notepad++. But the good thing about this is that you can add comments. So if any of the column types are type 2, which is text, then assume that the columns are names. So you can add comments in this editor section of the advanced formula environment. And then once you've created your Lambda in here, you hit this button and you sync names with the Excel name manager, and then they become available in the workbook. And I guess I should mention the other point as well, which is about importing gists. You may have seen me post gists before, and a gist is just a definition of a Lambda function. And you can see that the Lambda is in here for this fill totals one, which was a problem that Alan Murray posted about Power Query. Now I can either copy the definition here and paste it into the name manager, or I can copy this link and I can hit this button, import, paste the link there, and hit import, and now it's imported whatever it is that I just imported, fill totals somewhere. Here it is. So that's how you import a gist, and then if you hit that, you can now use fill totals in your spreadsheet. So there's lots of good people sharing great functions. Some of them might be useful. You should have a look.
And in terms of Excel versions, we can use these in Excel Online as well, right? Do you know about that?
I believe so, yeah. It needs to be a Microsoft 365 license, as I understand. If
Sergey is still around, he will for sure know how to answer that, or if anyone knows, let us know as well, because sometimes we do not have access to the most current Microsoft 365 versions, but we can still play with Excel Online with a Microsoft account. So that's another way to test this. Okay, any questions? Feel free to turn on your microphones, your camera, say hello, say thank you, and we will be closing the session in a few minutes. If there are any other questions or comments that I missed, please let me know. You're very welcome. There's thank yous there. Grania, I'm not sure if I missed any important question. If I did, please let me know if you happen to catch something that I haven't mentioned.
I think you covered most of them.
Okay.
So the only other one was the user-defined question that Henry put in, but that's essentially the gist answer, isn't it? So can Lambda formula be saved into a user-defined function library for use by different workbooks, like you can do with the VBA-based UDFs?
Oh, you mean like in the personal macro workbook?
Sounds like it. It's he wants a user-defined library.
Yeah, so that is. I don't believe you can save lambdas in the personal macro workbook, and if you want to move them between workbooks at the moment, anyway, you need to import the gists, or it's actually sufficient to just copy make a copy of a sheet that has the lambdas that you want and copy it into your new workbook, and it will bring the lambdas with it.
Yeah, it's the
so
first.
Yeah.
It's the first time that copying a spreadsheet that carrying all the names with it became useful, I guess. It's always so annoying. Most of the times it's annoying when all the names come when we copy a sheet over to another workbook, but in this case, we would want the names to carry over with the lambdas in it.
Yep.
Okay, there's Eric there. Nice to see you. Okay. Any other questions or comments? Can you put your contact information up again, Owen, in case someone wants to reach out to you? Feel free to contact Owen and connect on the various platforms. And if all the questions are answered, I will stop the recording now.
Okay. Thanks for giving me a chance to speak. I need a drink.
Thank you for accepting the invitation. We are the ones to thank you. Stop